Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Real quick, for those that were, tracking the legislature this session, if you'd like to, maybe in the chat, give a rating for how you think the legislature did, from a scale of 1 to 5. So 5 is like best session ever. 1 is like it's terrible and the world is ending. I'm just curious about how folks saw this last session. Zero from Sherry. Was okay. Oh, yeah, it's a pretty wide range so far. Um, yeah, there's definitely some missed opportunities for sure. We definitely did though have some prehistoric wins that I'd like to would talk more about this session. Um, that's right. And I did want to note though that I can't overstate how how much work that our staff and volunteers and our allies partners have put into what put in at the legislature this session. Like I'm so proud of all of the folks that are on the team. But really, to the extent we did have wins, some of which we'll go over today, it's really about your contributions and your all collective willingness to raise your voice and stand up to defend our islands and all that we love about Hawaii. And so, yeah, so just really want to make sure that you all understand how important that is, especially I'm gonna talk a little bit about that in a second. So I'm just gonna share my screen, just have a little slideshow. Why is it paused? Okay, let's wait. Let me see if I can show. See. Okay, okay, there we go. So, as Kristen mentioned for tonight, I wanted to take a step back first and talk a little bit about, why this is so important that the community is engaged with our legislature. Talk a little bit about our process, what we consider, as we engage in issues, take positions, and call out for action by the community. Then we'll go over, the outcomes of this last legislative session. There's some loose strings. There's a little bit of uncertainty with some bills, and also, though, as I mentioned earlier, there were some successes and some pretty big wins that I'm excited to share with you about, and that our guest speakers will also help us reflect on. And then, as Kristen said, looking ahead, we'll think about the veto deadlines, actions we can take now, and in the interim as we look forward to next session. And hopefully we'll have time for Q&A, answer some questions, and maybe even provide some opportunities for you all to share about bills you've been tracking. Because obviously, I'm not going to go over every single bill of significance just because we'd be here like all night long if we did that. But I know there's a lot more out there that I won't be able to cover today just because of the time limitations. So I didn't want to take a step back and just reflect on why it's so important that we engage, that people engage, that we keep reaching out and trying to get more folks to raise their voices. And really, I think everyone can agree that Hawaii, our islands, are incredibly valuable, right? I mean, some would say precious, some would say sacred. But there are different perspectives as to where that value comes from, right? And also what that means for us in terms of our responsibilities and our rights as as residents, as tenants, landowners, stewards, and as Keiki Okaina, as ancestors for our future generations. And unfortunately, there are some perspectives that view our islands, view Aina and our land environment as more of a commodity where you can extract value from it in the short term, and maybe those perspectives aren't really thinking about the longer term implications for our environmental integrity, our social fabric, our food security, our water security, and so forth. And oftentimes those entities and institutions that are maybe taking a more narrow perspective on what it means to be a tenant of these islands, like those entities have the resources, right, to hire lobbyists, to hire PR firms, to make campaign donations and so forth, and that essentially ensures that their voice is heard at the Capitol. And our legislators they're not dumb, right? And they're not evil for the most part. But at the same time, if the only voices they're hearing are from these particular, narrow perspectives, these short-term interests, and that also exclude a number of these larger, bigger picture considerations, and that can lead to some, less than enlightened decision making, right? Some dangerous policies and neglect, of our, I think a bigger responsibility to the Aina and to Hawaii. And so that's why it's so important that the legislators also hear from you, right? From the citizens, from people who care about, big picture, the long term, about things like public health and our kids' food security and our kids' water security and the social fabric and the social environment which they will that they will inherit. Right? And so it's very, very important. And when you think about what's happening in the planetary context, just look at what's going on the continent of the United States. We have, massive wildfires. We had ash falling in New York from wildfires in Canada. Like huge droughts impacting the food producing regions where we in Hawaii get much of our food from. There's coastal inundation of cities like chronic coastal inundation of New Jersey or New Orleans or southern Florida, right? And also too, there's some pretty unstable things happening as well in terms of our social fabric on the continent. And really in Hawaii too, we're also seeing the impacts of what we've been doing to our planet, right? So we're seeing our economic and cultural foundations being threatened by sea level rise, for example, our coral reefs, which are the basis of our economy, of our cultural practices, of our grandchildren's food supply, and really the first lines of defense against extreme weather events like storm surges. We're seeing those coral reefs get bleached over and over again. We all know about the flooding that happened in recent years and then the fires that we've seen, the tragedies. And so all that to say, it's really ever more important that we all engage, not just at the polls, but in the as a regular practice, you engage and make sure that there's policies that are being pursued, and that also and consider our need for these foundations of a survivable future, foundations of a resilient future and a hopeful future. Right? And so for us, we think a lot about these three pillars of resilience, right? Like water, right? So equitable access to clean water. How can we ensure that for the communities that are not just here today, but for future generations, and not just for people, but for all the living systems that rely on water as their source of life, right? We want to think about Aina, right? And how we can restore those living systems that have nourished the people of Hawaii and that can still nourish and feed over 1 million people if we pivot towards these traditional time-tested indigenous land stewardship and food cultivation practices. And perhaps most importantly, the third pillar of resilience is restoring and building on our social fabric. Like Kaia'ulu, right? Our sense of community, of connection and of love with for each other and for our home. And that's really empirically looking at studies from other places, that's probably one of the most important things that we need to be focusing on in light of this global context, this planetary emergency that we're all facing. So all that to say, like it's not a trivial thing that you're all willing to step up and help build this hopeful future for our islands and for our people and everyone and everything that calls it home. And we really need to start thinking about how we can expand our numbers, right? So we can increase our influence and help make the pivots that are going to be necessary to protect Hawaii and protect our everything and everyone that we love here. Yeah, so that's kind of like the background context of our work and why I think it's so important that you all are so engaged. Now I want to take a maybe closer look at just to talk about how the Sierra Club comes up with our policy positions, how we choose what to prioritize, and the tools that we use to kind of help facilitate the engagement that I was just talking about. So
Wait,
just
sorry
yes.
to interrupt. We can't see your slides.
Oh,
So you can share a different window. Sorry.
okay. Sorry. Oh, that's
Back
weird.
in.
Okay.
Before we get into the bills and things, just wanted to let you know. There we go.
Okay. That's so weird. Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah. Okay. So the how do we pick our our policy positions? So really, it's really our policy positions are driven by the chapter executive committee, right? So these are the volunteers. They're like our board of directors who guide our work. So they do that by adopting policies. So you go on our website, you click on About Us, you click on policies and see the various policies we've adopted. There's some very general with regards to natural resource management, some more specific like regarding like aquarium collection or energy justice. Uh, to the extent we might see legislation that doesn't clearly fall under one of these policies, then what we can do is also, as staff, make recommendations to the executive committee or their members may also, flag things, and then they'll take a vote in a position, and so that's really how we come up with just our stances on issues, and just to also. But it's not going. Okay, there you go. Yeah, and I was gonna say, and our executive committee, just so folks know, like they're elected, right, by our membership. So if you'd like to have, we can always use more volunteers willing to serve in the executive committee, or otherwise, become a member, and you'll be eligible to vote for these individuals and make sure that there's the right people driving what the Sierra Club does and the positions we take in terms of how we prioritize advocacy, right? So, as you probably know, there are like 3,000 bills, 3,000 plus bills introduced at the legislature this session. So, and we obviously can't engage all of them. I think we tracked like 800 something measures. But, in terms of when do we jump in, when do we like raise our voice or put out a call to action for people to engage? We think about these various considerations, right? So, we want to make sure that we're actually, whatever bill we're looking at or resolution, like it's actually a solution to a problem. So for example, oftentimes we might have good laws and policies on the books, but they need to be implemented via rulemaking, right? Or they need to be like funded, right? And so um, or prioritized. And so like there may be things where it's not necessarily legislation that's needed, but it's more implementation on the executive side of government. We want to think about if these measures are going to have a big impact like across Kaʻaumoana, or if it's going to affect only like a neighborhood, right? And oftentimes, the chapter will focus on those bigger impact bills, whether it's geographic or in terms of or generational. Whereas for those more regional issues, we have what are called county groups. So like a Maui group, Hawaii Island group, Oahu group, and they will engage on those more like island specific issues. Um, and want to think about like, is there a consensus around the solution in the community? We want to think about if our advocacy is needed, right? If there's a whole ton of people already working on an issue, if our benefit is only going to be marginal or not really helpful at all, then maybe we can dedicate that energy and time to other issues where we might have more of an impact. And then also, so folks know, like we try to be very mindful of what we ask the community to do, right? If we send out action for every single bill that we're testifying on, then it's going to just burn everyone out. And so we really want to make sure that we are, honoring your time. And when we do pull out call to action, it's for something that's really serious, that your voice is really needed for. Yeah, and then we do have tools when it is time to, or when we do think it's a good opportunity for the community to get engaged. There's tools that we use. Even we do a lot of education, especially in the off sessions. So you might have attended a panel on the Land Use Commission, or if you read our Malama Monthly, we often identify issues in there and kind of break things down for folks. We've done trainings on how the legislature works, how bills are passed. We've done community organizing trainings. And that's all really to prepare the community to get engaged when the legislature is in session, because oftentimes we have very little time, like a few days to respond to a hearing notice. And so when these bills of importance do get introduced and scheduled for a hearing, and we need people to show up or to spread the word, then we have some tools like the Capital Watch blog, so hawaiicapitalwatch.org. You can actually go to that website and subscribe to legislature action alerts. We also have other email lists. So, like for example, we have a Red Hill list, a Streams list, and so if those are particular issues that you'd like to engage on in those subject matter areas, and you can go to sierraclubhawaii.org/subscribe, and you can actually select what kinds of alerts you'd like to get based on topics or subject matter. There's also what's called an environmental legislative network. So this is really kind of an informal email list that we maintain along with the Conservation Council for Hawaii, and it's a whole wide range of individuals that want to hear about opportunities for action, right? So we have teachers and students and lawyers and legislators and just anyone who cares about our INA can join this list. And you can just email us if you're not on it, you'd like to be on it. And people just send action alerts about things they're tracking, and that includes and we'll also take advantage of that. Otherwise, you can also follow us on social media. Our Instagram, Sierra Club HI, that's our handle. And other things we do, right? So we write guest columns for traditional media. We try to do press events. Some of you might have gotten text alerts about this presentation tonight, and that's kind of a new tool that we've been exploring. And yeah, and it's really advocacy is a sandbox, right? So there's all different ways that people can get engaged, not necessarily in a hearing on a bill, in the room in the Capitol. Yeah, and so just as a recap of how much the community is engaged, that we help to facilitate. We've tracked, as I mentioned, 834 measures. We submitted testimony on about 60 of them, and we put out calls to action for 15 bills, through email action alerts and social media alerts and so forth. And it makes a difference. We've got over 2,500 pages of community testimonies on these key measures, these priority bills, and you can see. I mean, I know there's some disappointment in what didn't pass or what did pass, but there's some really bad stuff that we're increasingly able to defeat because legislators they pay attention. Like most of the time, people aren't engaged, right? So they'll move stuff that has 5 or 6 testimonies, and then all of a sudden there's a bill that they're getting really pressured to pass, but you have 5 dozen people in opposition. I've seen time and again that they will respond to that. Not always, but it seems to work more than it doesn't, in terms of stopping the bad stuff, especially. So yeah, I'd like to call up Marti Townsend. So Marti is the engagement specialist at Earth Justice Mid-Pacific office. She's also my predecessor here at the Sierra Club. So I mean, honestly, I'm sure many, if not most of you, are here because of the organizing and recruiting and education and staff that she hired and all the things that she did as a Sierra Club director, and now as a engagement specialist, an organizer with Earth Justice. So she'll hopefully be able to jump in on some of these bills because we did work closely together on a number of them. Quick rundown of takeaways. So only 2 really bad bills, like loose string bills, I think made it through the legislature, and I'll talk about them in a minute. There are also a handful of high profile, I call them we shall see bills, but mostly good, promising, but also they're going to need maybe a greater level of continued engagement as they get implemented, just to make sure that their visions are realized, and maybe some of the unintended consequences are mitigated. But then, as I mentioned, there are actually some really big wins. Almost all of the bad bills, as I mentioned, were defeated. We passed some pretty significant measures to protect our grandkids' drinking water from landfills. There's a resolution now to help prevent the exposure of children and families in Pu'ua to lead, super high levels of lead, that we're working on implementing in the coming months. And then I think one of the most historic and exciting things was our work on the Water Commission nomination for the Loya seat, or the seat that is supposed to be reserved for an expert in Native Hawaiian water management. And our guest speakers, I think, will have a lot of insight about that bill, about that measure, that appointment. And then, yeah, and I'll go over some, looking forward to next session, things that, some policies that didn't pass this year that we might want to revisit. Also some issues that we anticipate with regards to appointments in important boards and commissions. And we have our national staff, Lindsay Beebe here, who also helps with, we're looking at really upping our game. And for folks that want to engage at a higher level, we have some programs that can help you in the offset session, establish relationships with decision makers, and yeah, and hopefully get even more good things passed next year or in the next coming sessions. So yeah, so let's start with the stuff, the annoying things, right? So there's one bill that passed. It's HB 732. It's basically seeks to fast track coastal development in what's called the special management area. So pretty much the coastal areas of our islands are included in what's called the special management area. And if you want to build a building or certain types of infrastructure in this special management area, you need to get what's called a special management area permit. And so the way the law has been written is that if the development that you're doing is going to cost more than $500,000, more than $500,000, then you need to have a public hearing on the project. And that's that's really important because it's when the community hears about a project and then they can provide information to the planning department, to the developer about things they might not be aware of, right? So maybe there's runoff issues, or maybe there's a limu bed that might get impacted by wastewater, or this is access for surfing or for cultural practices or fishing or so forth, right? So that's where you get that kind of detailed information that can minimize the impacts of coastal development, which otherwise may have really, as we have seen, as we're seeing, may have really like dire effects on our shorelines, which are in coastal areas. So this bill, instead of having that $500,000 trigger for a public hearing, it increases that to $750,000. And every 5 years, that amount will increase based on inflation. So we're going to see more and more projects, coastal developments that aren't required to have a public hearing and can just get permitted through planning department staff approval. So essentially that means going forward, we're going to see less opportunities for community input on coastal development and potentially less informed decision-making under our coastal zone management area law. And really the question, and this bill is, proponents of this measure are saying, well, that $500,000 trigger was set, 20 years ago, and, cost of construction are higher and land's higher, so we should be increasing that threshold. But 20 years ago, we really didn't have as much information as we do now about the impacts of coastal development, about how much we should be valuing our nearshore waters. And so the question I have for all of us thinking about this bill is, should these rising construction costs mean that we turn our back to our rising seas?
Never turn your back on the ocean. We should have never, ever, ever passed this bill, and I really hope that that Governor Green vetoes it because it's a death warrant for our ocean, our shorelines, because uh, you're gonna what we should be doing is discouraging coastal development, right? We want to encourage people to move back from the shoreline, but allowing this dollar amount to continue to increase, it basically entices all of these rich people who have coastal properties and they want to, continue to improve them. You know, spending, good money after bad, or bad money after good, whatever the saying is. They're just, this is just totally counter to what our public policy has been around in an effort to save our beaches. And it's sad that this is an example of how special interests operate. They came in with a really oversized amendment. They dogged this bill better than anybody else. And then, even though we were able to like beat them back and defang the worst parts of the bill, they still got something passed that allows them to um, encourage and increase development on the shoreline, which is a bad idea. So anyway, I really hope this bill gets vetoed, and if it doesn't, then I think maybe we should work on trying to fix this in the future and have a bill in the future that undoes some of the harm that was done by this bill.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. Exactly, and yeah, and there will be we'll talk a little bit later about the veto opportunities that we still have. Um, yeah. Well, and another thing that I should say is we didn't act. This wasn't one of the bills where we really where we pulled the trigger and got people to did action alerts around just because we were prioritizing other even worse things that we hopefully were able to stop.
Which we were successful at defeating. So it was a good strategy call.
Um, Another bill, which you may have heard of, it's HB 796. So this bill would have required a sunset of tax credits, across the board, right? So for the film industry tax credits, or affordable housing, and what concerned a number of our partners and people who want to see us transition to a renewable future, it also would sunset the solar and renewable energy tax credit. So, if you install a renewable energy system for your house, solar or wind, then you can actually get a tax credit for for that investment. And really that helps our economy and helps our residents move away from depending on fossil fuels, right? Which are harmful for our wallets and harmful for our environment. The good news is that Governor Green did tell KITV on Tuesday he will veto the bill, but that's just
Yay.
talking, right? So we won't know for sure until he publishes a notice of intent to veto and then follows through with the veto. So it's as Lenny Kravitz says, it's not over till it's over. There's a couple bills I did want to mention. So SB 1296, this measure would allow properties impacted by disasters to be redeveloped without any special management area permit, right? So and it was amended at the end to prevent that exemption from applying to like shorefront properties as well as properties impacted by waves. And it was also amended to sunset in 3 years. So really what this is about is helping to facilitate the reconstruction of Lahaina. I think there's still some concerns, right? Like there's some older structures might not have been built or probably weren't built in consideration of the impacts to the nearshore environment. And so maybe there's opportunities to deal with those impacts going forward through the special management area permitting process. And really what concerns me is that this incentivizes the reconstruction in the same footprint as the bill says, the rebuilding of a community without that would just replicate the vulnerabilities that led to tragedy in Lahaina, right? So even though CZMA doesn't really talk about think about fire, think about this, but because they're giving them a specific exemption to rebuild things exactly the way it was, we might be encouraging people just to roll the dice yet again in terms of fire vulnerability, among other things. So that's on the governor's desk. There's also a resolution that was passed. It was kind of gotten replaced, but I guess they can do that to resos. But it would set up a nuclear energy working group to look at the potential for nuclear energy as an energy source in Hawaii. And even the state energy office was testifying that it's way too early to be considering this. The technology is not there. I mean, the everything from waste stream impacts, what are we going to do with the depleted fuel to like, what if there's an earthquake or a tsunami? And then, our islands are so limited. So if there's a situation, a disaster, then that's going to really rob our kids of some pretty significant things. And so hopefully, if anything, there's no veto, you can't veto a resolution. So, either this working group won't be convened, hopefully, or if it does convene, that it really be a dose of hard reality to its proponents that this probably isn't worth investing of time and energy into exploring, especially now. But for the most part, I'm sure I'm missing some, there might be other things I'm missing, but those are the kind of the bad bills that we're looking at this session. And yeah, which is not bad, right? I mean, we'll talk about some of the bad bills that will be defeated, and those are really scary. There are some bills that were, have some hope. They're I think trying to address some high priority areas, but as I said, we're going to need I think further engagement and advocacy as they're being implemented. And so the legislature, to their credit, both chambers have really been prioritizing invasive species and biosecurity. We saw two omnibus bills that had all kinds of provisions, some very different visions on the kind of policies that we need and investments we need to up our game and protect our islands from becoming infested with ever more invasive species that impact our watersheds and impact our food security and public health and cultural practices. And yeah, I mean, there's some things that are super obvious, like don't sell infested plants. Like that's a policy that should have been adopted years ago, but we're just having a hard time doing that. And there's some things that are maybe, it's not clear whether it's going to have the intended benefit, right? So this omnibus bill, it has some good things. It has, funding for a Hawaii Ant Lab, for the Coconut International Mosquito Response Team, for the Hawaii Invasive Species Council, and these are all actually things that we have that work. And that just needed more investment. So that's good. It clarified some inspection and quarantine requirements for inter-island transports. We're not shipping CRB infested mulch to an island that doesn't have that thing. It does have some things that are, we're gonna have to wait and see how they pan out. So the Department of Agriculture, if you've been tracking invasive species, is notorious for not using its authorities to regulate known vectors of invasive species spread, specifically nurseries and landscaping businesses. Communities crying out because they're buying plants and buying mulch that had CRP and Fire, and no one was stopping these businesses from doing that. Most of the nurseries are good. They do the best practices and eradicate, but some just didn't care. And so to address, and this is just one example of a long history with Department of Agriculture leadership in neglecting their biosecurity responsibilities and their regulatory responsibilities. So one of the ideas that came out of the legislature was to rename the Department of Agriculture as the Department of Agriculture and Biosecurity, and create a new deputy director of biosecurity who, under this HB 427, is going to need to do things like create a public-facing dashboard to track different actions and the status of invasive pests. It does provide for some private-public partnerships for things like transitional facilities. So like a private company can set up a building and say, you can get certified, and the state can say, hey, if you're going to bring stuff in from elsewhere, you have to take it to the secure facility and we're going to inspect everything. Also allows for private entities to propose management plans to deal with invasive pests. And so I think those are things that are fairly new, and for Hawaii especially, and they're going to take a long time to implement. And so we'll have to kind of keep an eye on how these ideas are developed and implemented on the ground. One thing that's really concerning, and that was a concern throughout session, was this proposal to move the Hawaii Invasive Species Council from being housed under the Department of Land and Natural Resources to this new Department of Agriculture and Biosecurity. And the thought was to consolidate everything under one roof, so to speak. But given the concerns we've had with Department of Ag leadership, the fact that Department of Ag is focused on, currently focused on agriculture and not on the bigger picture, like our watersheds and our oceans and things that Department of Land and Natural Resources has, prioritizes, and the disruption that could result if we move KISC under the Department of Agriculture. There's a lot of concerns about this provision. The one, I guess, mitigating factor is that this transfer to the Department of Agriculture won't take place until January 1st, 2030. So we have some time to see if the Department of Ag is going to step up its biosecurity game and really embrace this responsibility that it's always had. And if not, then we're gonna have to, as Marty said, maybe fix this bill a little bit. Okay. There's and this is also really, I think, important bill, an important issue. It's HB 505. It's just basically establish a position in government to track and oversee the efforts to remediate our INL and our VI from jet fuel contamination as a result of the Red Hill fuel spills. And so, this person would be housed under the chairperson of the Department of Land and Natural Resources. They have to do things like educate the public and track the ecosystem health, and and they'll have a special fund to take money, federal monies for remediation and for monitoring our aquifer. I'm not sure how, what the situation is with the federal government, but last year there's thoughts that we would be able to bring in a significant amount of federal funds to help the Navy clean up its mess, but we'll see. And then I guess the one kind of wrinkle is that we've seen time and again, and Marty can attest to this, where we have especially with Red Hill, and really anything that where the military hasn't done things in the most responsible way, there might be an immediate reaction, but over time, people start to forget and start to defer, and and because this person will be under the chairperson of the DLNR and not really answerable to the public, you can't really, there's no mechanism like a sunshine meeting to talk to this person. There's some concern that over time it might become more like a greenwasher for the Navy, or make excuses for the Navy rather than hold them accountable to their responsibility to clean up their mess. So, and we've kind of seen that drift with the Fuel Tank Advisory Committee, which came out, was established after the 2015 spill at Red Hill. And, over time, it just kind of became this, like it not really, it did not prevent the 2021 spill that has now put us in a water crisis. Okay. Yeah, okay. And then everyone keeps asking me about this measure, the green fee bill. I mean, I think the vision is great. Looking to, marginal increase in our tourist accommodation tax, 0.75%, applying this tax to cruise ships, which I guess weren't paying the TAT. And then the increase in revenues would then ostensibly be dedicated to, help us with our climate response. And so they anticipate bringing in maybe $100 million a year. But I think the wrinkle, right, is that it doesn't specifically dedicate these extra revenues to anything in particular. The Special Land Use and Development Fund that the DLNR holds that normally gets TAT revenues, it's still capped at $3 million in terms of what it can receive. And so I guess the idea is that every year the government will go to the Capitol and say, here's my idea for how to spend this extra money we think we're going to get. And it's up to the legislature to follow through or not, right? So, yeah, so there's no guarantees, and so all the more we need to kind of make sure we're ready to advocate that these funds are used in the right and appropriate way. And I think another important thing to think about, and this is kind of nuanced, but the state has an unfulfilled obligation to use revenues from the lands that were stolen from the Hawaiian Kingdom. Some of those revenues have to be used to benefit Native Hawaiians, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of disputes about what counts as revenues from those lands, and there's a big issue with airport landing fees, which are significant, and yet because of some federal legislation, those revenues, even though they're on stolen lands, can't be dedicated to Native Hawaiians. So there is some hope that this green fee bill, however it would manifest, would be able to help fulfill the state's obligations to the Native Hawaiian community. And so it remains to be seen, if these, because there is no provision recognizing that this might be able to replace the landing fees at the airport, we'll have to see if there's other ways we can make sure that Native Hawaiians benefit from essentially the use of their lands that were stolen and that many groups continue to care for, which is the foundation of why people want to come to Hawaii. And that's a little complicated, but it's one of the things that we're thinking about with this bill. So that's, those are really the kind of, annoying things. So, yeah, so let's move on to the good stuff, right? So as I said, we killed a lot of bad bills, like right off the session. And this is, I think, testament to the power of people's voices. There are a couple bills that would have, for example, HB1, SB 120 would have stopped their state building codes from being updated. And so I never really thought about this about building codes, but what they do is there's international codes that are built updated every few years that are updated based on like years-long studies of best practices of disasters in other places around the planet, in terms of how to make things more efficient, cost effective. And so it's actually really important that we update our building codes. And as we develop and redevelop, we're doing so in a way that's going to best protect the tenants of these buildings, protect first responders, make sure that people are using energy efficient infrastructure so that we're not polluting the planet, and we're also like saving money and yeah, and also like thinking about broader scale, like how we make neighborhoods designed so that they're more resilient. But unfortunately, these building code updates are getting blamed for permitting review delays, which I think that's a much bigger problem. You can read civil beat. It's more so like training and office culture and things that are like preventing the planning departments from being able to hire retained staff, right? So like we should be dealing with those issues before we start foreclosing opportunities to make our built environment safer, healthier, cost efficient areas to live and working. And so thankfully this is one of the very early measures we killed, but I credit a lot of these bills for being stopped, even though they had such strong support from the development community. It's really because people realize how important it is that we update our building codes. And if you look at these bills in the Capitol website, you can see all the testimonies that were submitted on a subject that's not, I wouldn't say is top of mind, the sexiest thing to think about or talk about. So thank you to everyone who submitted testimony on those bills. We also saw another measure. We call these zombie bills because they keep getting introduced over and over and over again. And so one of these is HB 896. So what it would do is fast track like huge large-scale urbanization of our agricultural and rural lands. As folks familiar with Hawaii's history knows, a lot of our lands are owned by plantations that are growing sugar and pineapple, and now those industries have gone, and so these entities want to make money, but they're not going to make money from farming. So what they want to do is turn their ag lands and rural lands to urban, and then build housing, things that are more profitable. The problem is that can impact our food security, it can impact our water security, our public trust resources, our Native Hawaiian traditional custom practices, and other things, right? That other public interests. And so the Land Use Commission is kind of a way for the public interests to be represented in these large-scale land use change proposals, these urbanization proposals. And the Land Use Commission looks out for all these things, right? Our food security, our public trust resources, our job creation, like other things we care about, through a kind of like a court-like process where they actually take evidence. You can take expert testimony, kamaʻaina testimony, you can cross-examine witnesses and so forth, and they come up with specific findings of fact and explicitly say they're going to make these conditions for like these things because of these things on the record. And unfortunately, that's very inconvenient for landowners. People don't want to be told what to do with their land holdings. And so there's constant attacks to try and strip the Land Use Commission of its authority or eliminate it altogether. And so this bill would say, you know what, anything under 100 acres, the Land Use Commission doesn't have a say in any changes, urbanization. Yeah, kind of a bad bill. And thankfully, I think every year we see less and less of these bills and more people standing up against them when they are scheduled for a hearing. And so we're able to kill this bill early on in session as well. And again, thank you so much to everybody to engage and spread the word and share their action plans. Two actually really bills that got a lot of attention and that were moving pretty quickly because of certain commercial interests. SB 1074, HB 661. And so these bills have to do with our environmental review law. And so folks who are not familiar, certain things before the government agency approves certain things, right? Like the use of state or county lands or funds, for example, there has to be an environmental review, like an environmental assessment or impact statement, or an exemption, or, specific exemption, so that they can assess, this decision makers can assess, like, what are the costs that environmental and cultural and public health and all the costs that this decision might result in, and what can we do to mitigate those impacts, right? And so it's a very key and critical planning mechanism, has prevented, I'm sure, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to our environment, because when you actually take a hard look at things and say, oh, there's a better way to do things, and oftentimes the government agency requires you to do them, and then you avoid those costs. And it's the way where these laws get their teeth is, you can't actually carry out action. You can't actually approve anything or let that thing commence until environmental review is done, right? So that you can plan for these impacts. These bills would flip that on its head and say, okay, you can authorize, you can issue all these commercial permits for Kaanapali, even though without environmental review, even though there's public safety issues and wastewater dumping issues and public access issues that should be reviewed. You can just let them go ahead and let the Department of Land and Natural Resources give out those permits, and while environmental review is pending, right? So you're going to have all these impacts accumulate over time without even knowing what they are, and from the issuance of these permits, and there's no end date to to say do an environmental review by a certain amount of time, right? So it could be years, decades before environmental review is completed. Meanwhile, all these impacts are occurring and accumulating. And so these bills are really dangerous. They mutated a lot, got broader and narrower over session, but ultimately they're moving in a very bad direction for one of our bedrock environmental laws. And I think with all of the people coming out and hundreds of people testifying against them, eventually the legislature, and specifically the Senate Water and Land Committee, I chair, was decided it wasn't a good idea to move these forward. So yeah, so we're able to avoid those, kill those bills, which is very timely, because any Supreme Court nerds might realize it was a very bad opinion rendered by the Supreme Court of the United States about the federal environmental review law. And so all the more reason for us to strengthen our law and stay, stick to our guns and the strong foundations we have under the state environmental review laws, and not erode them in a way like you see happening on the federal level. Another bill that got a lot of traction that a lot of people came out for is a bill to prevent landfills from being sited over drinking water aquifers. And so just so folks know, every landfill, even modern landfills, are anticipated to break down, to fail at some point, right? Whether it's 10, 20 years from now or like 100 years from now. And landfills, as Ariel says, landfills are forever. So if we allow a landfill to be built over a drinking water aquifer, knowing that rainfall is decreasing, that temperatures are rising, that our grandkids are going to need as much water as they can get, we'd be taking that away from them eventually if we place a highly toxic landfill over a drinking water aquifer. And so there's several bills that were introduced to kind of prevent that from happening. This bill that did pass, thanks again to a lot of support from the community, would prohibit placing landfills above or MALCO of what's called the underground injection control line. So it's a line around our aquifers. And so so you have to put a landfill outside of that line. And it also protects Class A agricultural lands. But we still have a problem on Oahu, especially. We need to find a new site for a new landfill. And so, off session and going forward, I think we need to continue prevailing on the Navy to let us use their lands that are over Cap Rock, that won't contaminate another drinking water aquifer, especially after they've compromised the groundwater on the Red Hill. There's also a need to really address the environmental injustices that have been inflicted upon the community out in Nanakuli and Waianae, not just from the PVT private landfill that's right in the middle of the neighborhood, but we have the waste to energy plant. We have oil power plants, and really, unfortunately, there's immeasurable harms and burdens that have been placed on those communities, and so we need to address that. Right? Not just say, oh, we're not going to put a landfill there anymore, but really like think, ideally in my head, like community there should like guide us in how we can come up with reparations, so at least make up for some of those harms, even though there's um, and then the big picture is we just have to do our waste stream. Right? We have this uh, uh, over consumerist extractive economy that just encourages us by design to create waste, right? And that's, plastics, petrochemical industry is one of the leading contributors to the climate crisis. We gotta figure out how we can free ourselves from that system. And that's something that, again, we're gonna have to continue working on. And a number of groups hopefully can continue the advocacy around. And then I think the final bill, oh, wait, sorry. Uh, Another victory is we are able to pass this cost containment resolution by both chambers. So Senate and House passed it. And essentially it continues a working group to deal with the really high levels of lead being detected in the sand, in the soil, in the fish, in the homes surrounding the Pu'uloa Range training facility, which is a century-old firing range that's owned by the U.S. Marine Corps, and that's has been accumulating lead for 100 years. And so we've had a panel on this. You can for more information, you can scan that QR code. But everything from like erosion and lead percolating down into the sand, which is very porous, and lead kind of moves quickly through sand, and so like that kind of may explain why we're seeing so much lead in the beach area, to the impact of bullets, right? So when bullets hit these berms that have like tens of thousands of times the level of lead that would trigger actions under any standard, those bullets pick up plumes of dust and vaporized lead, and that drifts with the winds over like the neighborhoods and over this. There's a school nearby, and so like that's really scary, especially if you have kids who go and play in the water or go to school. Like the impacts of lead on human health can be significant and reversible, and even more so for young people and pregnant people. So it's really important that we deal with this situation and protect generations of people from being exposed to lead and all the harms, the generational harms that come with that. So we'll be working on implementing, making sure the working group does its job along with the community there. Reach out to us if you want to be part of this effort as well, because there's going to be a lot of education and outreach that's going to need to be done. And finally, I wanted to turn this over to Marti and Auntie Makaʻala Kaʻaumoana to talk about one of the most, I think, inspiring and historic wins that we've seen at the legislature.
Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. So the GM 770 came about after many twists and turns in a very scary roller coaster ride that we were on. So I'm gonna take everybody back a while to right after the Lahaina wildfires. Some of you may recall that Kaleo Manuel, who was the deputy director for the Water Commission at the time of the Lahaina fires, was booted from his job, basically, right? He was reassigned after a letter from one of from Maui Land and Pine, suggesting that he didn't allow them to take water to help fight the fires. And this is a trope that the developers have been using for a while, saying that they are, that the stream protections and efforts to restore streams is undermining firefighting. Not true. As a result, there's a lot of community engagement. People were so angry to see Kaleo leave, especially the way that he left. He was the most successful deputy director the Water Commission has ever had, the first one of Kanaka ancestry. He had served for many years and had been moved on a lot of sort of entrenched issues, and it's a loss for all of us to see him go. Um, but it activated people in a way around the Water Commission that was really important because there were all kinds of shenanigans that were being pulled, and so Governor Green is, he's supposed to name someone to fill a vacancy on the Water Commission from a list of candidates that are vetted by a nominating committee. And the idea is we created this nominating committee in the Water Code as a way to try to insulate the Water Commission from outside political influence. And the idea is that we kind of spread out that power a little bit. So the House gets to name someone to the nominating committee, the Senate names somebody, and the governor names two people. Um, the governor totally abused this nominating process in the course of trying to fill this one seat, the seat that was previously held by Neil Hannes. It was a seat that a few years ago, had able to get it designated for someone with expertise in traditional and customary management practices, native wines around water. And you had been very successful seat. Kamana Beamer held it first, and then Neil Hannes, and then lo and behold, Governor Green wants to appoint somebody from the nominating committee list that was not well suited. He had four choices. One was James Chemo Faulkner, who was the last Luna for Pioneer Mills and was a commercial coffee farmer these days. Lori Buchanan, who is a community leader, business leader from Molokai. Molokai has never had a person there's never been a person from Molokai on the Water Commission. She was raised Aloha Aina. She's Aloha Aina through and through. She's been on the Planning Commission for Maui for many, many years. She does a wide range of things around environment, and she totally understands traditional and customary water management decisions and practices. And she would have been great. And then Hannah Springer, and then a fourth person that we don't know who they are, because applications to the Water Commissioner are allowed to be confidential. People were able to convince Governor not to appoint James Faulkner because it was just so controversial. But instead of going with the process, which would be to then name one of the other three people on the nominating committee list, he instead convened a new list. He kind of orchestrated the situation where, there were names being dropped off the list. And he came up with this narrative of like, well, if there aren't three names on the list, then it's incomplete and it's stale and I get to do it again. No such thing. The law does not say that. They have to run through all of the candidates before they run a new list. We sued Governor Green over this. He still went through this second nominating process named Hinano Rodriguez, who, an important fact that I forgot to mention about both James Faulkner and Hinano Rodriguez is that they are very good buddies with the primary private water diverter of West Maui, Peter Martin. He's the man who owns Launiupoko irrigation company, and he's the one who, amongst other things, he's the one that is building all these huge luxury mansions in the dry upper reaches of West Maui, and just diverting a ton of water and using it for infinity pools and exotic landscaping. I mean, he's the guy. The days after the Lahaina wildfires, the town is still smoldering, and he's shooting these huge water cannons like as sprinklers over just blank land and these like real exotic bougainvillea and things like that. And it was like to be as offensive and hurtful to people as possible is crazy, super insensitive. Anyway, thankfully, Hinala Rodriguez came to his senses. After he got an idea of what he was getting himself into, he withdrew his name. And so then the heat was really on. Governor Green had to decide whether he was going to go back to the original list or the second list, because both of those only had Hannah Springer and Lori Buchanan on them. And so he was he was stuck. He was going to have to either try and do this thing again where does another nominating committee and we would just, sue him again and we would continue to be stuck. Keep in mind the seat is empty at this point, and the Water Commission is making decisions without having the input of this expert seat affecting these decisions. And so, thankfully, from a lot of public pressure, we were able to convince the governor to name Hannah Springer. And I just wanted to, and it was great. Her confirmation hearing was excellent. It was very therapeutic in some ways. And she has been serving on the Water Commission since early May, and she's doing a great job. And yay, we won. And the thing is that like this really only came about because one, we were tenacious. We did not let up. Like Gov thought we would get bored and go away. No such thing. Two, we were strategically engaged, right? So we went through and figured out whose votes do we need in the Senate, right? Who has access to the governor to convince him to do the right thing? Who else do we know that could have any influence at all, help us in any way? And then we came up with strategies, using whatever relationships that we had to talk to those people and get them to see the world the way we see it and do the right thing. And yeah, and this is just one example of what happens when you put together, some, pleasantly pesterful people who care greatly about their resource and they don't give up, don't take no for an answer. Yeah, and I don't know, I'll answer questions if anybody has any about it.
Yeah. Thank you, buddy. Yeah. Yeah, and I think testament to all that work, there are 454 pages of testimony in support of anti-Hannah, which is funny at the hearing. So,
Yay!
and
And we involved students, experts, regular lay people. It was just like anybody and everybody. Like they should never ever feel like, I don't know enough, so therefore I shouldn't engage. Don't ever, yeah, don't let that hold you back.
Thank you, Marty. And I did want to invite Auntie Makaʻala Kaʻaumoana, longtime environmental advocate and friend of Auntie Hannah, and yeah, one of my role models to share some reflections as well.
Colleague and buddy to Hannah for many, many, many years. I will not reveal either of our ages. Thank you, Wayne. Wayne, yeah, someday he's going to have to bust me out of jail again. I know it's going to happen. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to have this chance to just say a few words about Hannah, the Hannah that I know. She is what should be in the dictionary next to the word keikiokaina. She absolutely is of the land in every way, in her vessels and in her bones. She is of the land. She comes from an area, Ka'upulehu, and that is dry, lava rock, that has little water. So managing water is how she grew up, what she understands, and what she lives every day. She doesn't have a lot of it, and so it's a precious thing for her, and she understands it. But she's physically and spiritually a dedicated scholar. So when it comes to someone who will not speak unless she knows of what she's speaking, Hannah is the definition of that. She truly studies every single aspect of every single thing, sometimes to an annoying degree for people that want to move on like me. But that's the yin and the yang of Hannah and Makaʻala. She's a truth seeker and a fact finder. I've never seen her swayed or moved by someone's aplomb or show. It's just not. It doesn't move her. Doesn't mean a thing to Hannah. That what's coming out of your mouth is half, and what you've done in your actions is the other half. And she shows respect for people who respect the places that they come from and demonstrate that. And she's committed to supporting all of that. Place-based management is in her marrow. It's what she believes, and every effort she's ever engaged in, at the very core of it was, what do the people of that place know? What do they think? Remember, she's one of the designers of Kapa'akai Okaina, and that's part of really listening with your innards to the people of a place. She's a student. She's constantly learning. She's a teacher. She's a practical example of how to truly live on the land as a servant and a steward. She walks the talk. She's very thoughtful, considers her words carefully. Any of you who've been around her in her presence and listened to her speak, are maybe listening to her now on the Water Commission. You catch that pace of her speech, that cadence of her speech, and that gives her time to carefully consider her next word, a skill I have not yet acquired. She's curious and willing to learn new things. She's not stuck in the past. She's not stuck in, well, this is how we used to do it. She loves to work with youth and future thinkers. She's creative, when it comes to, well, how are we going to get this done? And I'm excited about the potential. Obviously, I'm a big fan. And the only time I've ever felt, oh my goodness, Hannah, is sometimes she moves very methodically and very slowly. And we just all need to take a breath and relax, because that's how this woman works. And it's how she gets to the truth. She's also very brave and very strong. I've never seen her rocked. I've never seen her flick her head back and go, wait a minute, what is that? Never. She's a key part of the tri-weight effort, and has worked with Chad and folks for a long time trying to get that together. Everybody said, oh, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. Well, guess who made it happen? And it's because she mustered the people of that place. So let's all rejoice, I think, in that Hannah is there. I know Neil and Killa as well, but this is an extraordinary woman, and this is the right person at the right time. She's no youngster, and we benefit from that, but we also, it makes me nervous. Live long and prosper, Hannah, because the world still needs you, and certainly Hawaii needs you. Her motto is ke kahi I ke kahi. She says it to you as she leaves you at any moment, in any setting. Malama ke kahi I ke kahi. Take care of each other, and in her way, take care of your place. I'm beyond excited. I actually did not go in person because I would have been a puddle. Embarrassed myself and anyone sitting next to me. So I'm very moved, and I'm delighted that there's an ear now, which is what that seat is. There's an ear now on the Water Commission that listens to the sources of the place. It's not listening to the large landowners, not listening to, she'll be polite. She'll look like she's listening, but her ears are tuned to us and to our Aina. And that's what these times call for. And she's very brave. She can do it. She can do this job, and she will be heard. You might notice that she's sitting right next to Chair Chang. She's no mystery to Dawn. Dawn knows her well, and as already I can tell, benefiting from her counsel, requesting her counsel, and that'll be an important, maybe behind the door role for her. I'm assuming. Mahalo for this opportunity. I'm tickled pink.
And I can't believe how seriously, significantly we were able to turn this from like a really, really bad suggestion. James Faulkner, the last Luna of Pioneer Mills, being on the Water Commission, feel like a stab to the heart, right? We were able to like flip it. Like it's just so amazing. I'm so stoked for all of us. Good job, everybody.
That's kind of why, Marty. That's part of it. I mean, I would never devalue any of Hannah's role here, but that's part of it. He really screwed up. I mean, that was a terrible nomination. So if people weren't motivated before that, ha ha ha, they were motivated now, whoa, is that your idea? Well, um, I think, you know what I'm saying? I think
Yeah.
sometimes things happen when they're supposed to. Um, and
This is the
yeah,
natural
try that
consequence of
again.
governor's actions. Yep.
Yeah, try that again, Gov. Let's see how it works. Because now we know that we can make a difference, right? We can change
Yep.
your mind.
Yeah. And I would just add that, I feel like boards and commissions appointments are particularly important because once you do them, they're done, right? It's really hard to unseat somebody once they've been seated. And so, that's at the minimum of 4 years. Usually they get two terms, so it'd be 8 years of whatever decisions they're making. So it's really important to get good people on these boards and commissions. And like a bill, there can be a bad bill passes, and then you can just dedicate your life to turning that bill over and changing it, amending it. So, but there's no such option with appointments. So it's yeah, we did it. We did a good job. Way to go,
I
everybody.
know we always feel like these are the most important times. We always feel like, right,
Yeah,
this is my God, we really needed this time.
yeah,
We really needed this right now. We really did. The
yeah.
pressures that we have and the gap in knowledge sometimes on the commission. People, well-intentioned, smart people, but they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and she
Yeah,
does.
and none of the other seats are designated in any way, so they can be filled by anybody. We have a practice of making sure that there's representation from each island. There are two seats that are going to be up soon, and so people should, remain vigilant.
Thank you. I think it's such a beautiful reflection, and then yeah, a hopeful story. Um, yeah, and I mean, just Maui Komohana's water use permits, Waiha's water use permits. We have issues. We have implementation with stream flow restoration with for East Maui, Waianae is moving for the water management area designation. There's movements to restore Waikoloa stream. Like there's so much important work commissions to do, and it we really, really need the right people. And yeah, Internet is going to be key to all of that. So thank you to everyone who organized and did all the things. So we're running short on time, so I'll just kind of run through this real quick. So that coastal zone development bill I mentioned and the solar tax credit sunset, we actually have a system set up where if you text veto to 69866, it'll patch you right to the governor's office and just leave a message. Just be like, hey, Governor Green, can you please veto HB 732 to HB 796? And ask your friends to do so as well. So yeah, take a picture of this screen if you want. This recording will be up online afterwards, so you can also see those resources. And there are some bills that didn't make it this session. I did want to highlight SB 1166. This bill would allow insurers to make payouts as a result of climate-related disasters. Like those insurers can go after big oil companies, companies that have lied about the climate crisis. And so we have a big insurance industry fighting a big oil industry, and maybe that's one way we can get more accountability for
It's like
our
Mothra versus Godzilla. Who are you rooting for?
exactly. And then as Marty mentioned, this year we do have just in July of 2025, we're going to have 2 more open water commission seats, 2 open board of land natural resources seats, 3 land use commission seats, and a Supreme Court justice that are going to need to be appointed. So lots at stake. Governor Green's going to have a lot of important decisions to make, and so we all need to be able to make sure he makes the right choices. And if he makes the wrong choices, we have to make sure the Senate does its job and properly vets these nominees before confirming them to these boards and commissions, which, in light of the planetary emergency and what we're facing, these are the most important entities in state government, potentially.
Please consider applying for boards and commissions. You can go to the governor's website, and boards and commissions is a tab on the top there, and there's a 1-page, very simple application process. And then there's an interview usually for whatever. You can just check the box on all the seats that you would like to apply for. But we need good people, especially good people who maybe aren't well known to Governor. We have learned that he doesn't Google so much. And so, if you are you have the time and the ability and are, willing to put in the effort in defense of our natural cultural resources and our public health, we need you. Please apply.
So, thank you, Marty. And so one last final thing before we get to questions and answers. Sorry, we're running a little late, so we should have about 10 minutes or so to have more discussion, robust discussion with everyone. But we actually have a program that National is helping us stand up that will really focus on training and empowering you as an individual and your friends to establish the critical relationships with key decision makers, key lawmakers, or the people that you elect in the office. And so I would really like to encourage you all, if this is something you want to do to kind of up your advocacy game, and really, help better fulfill our collective kuleana, to protect our islands and build a hopeful future. You can scan the QR code. There's a tiny URL that you can sign up for now, or just like reach out to me and we'll connect you to the folks in charge of this program. It's really exciting to see the potential of having getting this really sophisticated advocacy mechanism going. And I want to thank Lindsay, who's our national liaison with the in-district lobby program, who's been just phenomenal training materials and we work closely together with myself and Kristen and others to kind of make sure that you're prepared and you have everything you need to become a even more powerful advocate for our in our islands. Okay, and then so yeah, we have about 10 minutes, and I'll stop sharing. And if anyone has any questions let's see, I can see. I'm gonna go up to. Oh yeah, I did want to thank you, Dave. So yeah, there is a fallback for the SMA permit. So Dave, right in the chat is he's making clear that a major permit will be triggered if there's a significant impact that will be anticipated, right? So that's kind of a fallback. But again, if we don't have a public hearing, a public notice requirement for these postal developments, you may not be able to make the argument, or the planning department staff might not be able to realize that there will be significant impacts of any particular specific coastal development project. Okay, and then let's see. So yeah, so thanks for clarification. John Shockley, who will pay for the increasing losses on coastal properties that are damaged or lost due to the rising ocean? See a threat where the public must pay for these losses from individual owners who knew this was going to happen. Yes, and that's exactly why we really need to figure out our manage retreat policies. There's things that the DLNR has proposed over previous years to where you can let people maintain their property for the short term, but they have to invest in moving back from the ocean. But otherwise, yes, it's going to be us, and it's really going to be our environment that pays for these short-sighted decisions. Chad's asking about the green fee. Are there any criteria on how green fee funds will be spent to guide implementation? So if you looked at the bill, it says the governor has to come up with a plan to say how he thinks this money should be spent, but nothing really requires the legislature to follow through on that request. That being said, his request has to fall within 3 categories, right? So natural resource protection and management, infrastructure resilience investments, so, right? Making, moving roads back from the ocean, for example, and then mitigating the impacts of tourism. So everything from beach erosion to fixing up our parks and our beach parks and community parks, state parks. Those are the kind of categories that he has to make his proposals within. And then it's up to the legislature to figure out what to fund. Okay. And then, I'm gonna jump to Q&A. So Ted Dolan, hi Ted. What should we do to strategize about federal cuts and about special session? That's a bigger question I think I have time to answer. We keep hearing that they may or may not hold a special session. So the legislature to reconvene this year. I think what I'm sensing is that they want to see how what's happening shakes out in the federal government, right? So there's lots of lawsuits challenging what the federal administration has done in terms of slashing funding and cutting grants, like arbitrarily ending grants that have been awarded and so forth. So I think the legislature is waiting to see how those things pan out before they reconvene to see how they can mitigate the impacts of those funding cuts.
Yeah, I think if there's anything that we could do around this, it's to get philanthropy to step up and fill the holes. There's not going to be enough money compared to what the U.S. federal government could provide, but it's still, we need to shore up our nonprofits that are reliant on federal funding.
Yeah. Thanks, Mary. And then Sherry, what are your thoughts on what's behind the push for nuclear power and SMRs, other than nuclear industry pushing this in several states? Is there a data center or some such thing in the works? Oh, that's interesting. I think there's going to be major investments in the supercomputer in Maui. And Marty's very familiar with that project. So I don't know if that's, they're going to try and create a data center or something that would require significant increases in energy. Yeah, and I'm not sure. All I know is that there are advocacy groups for nuclear power that are going to various other states, and I'll come to Hawaii, and maybe they see our energy insecurity issues as an opening for them to do a pilot project here in Hawaii. So yeah, I mean, but that's pure speculation.
And on note, our Constitution says no nuclear energy. So it's going to be a huge lift for them to get nuclear energy actually online in the Hawaiian Islands. That said, I don't think that we should ignore this threat. These things tend to come up like this, and they just sort of wear us down, basically. And so it's important that we are active in our pushing back against nuclear energy slowly weaseling its way into our energy portfolio. I mean, I don't know. I think part of it is that there are a lot of young people who have been told a certain story around how nuclear energy is the solution to all of our problems, and it's hard for us old folks to be like, it's because we don't want to dim their lights and things like that. So, I mean, it's going to be a lot of public education. I'm taking this working group as a sign that we need to do a lot more public education around this issue, and I'm convinced that we will be able to turn people away from this as a solution once they really start to learn and understand. There's a lot of young people who don't know about Fukushima, for example. So it's just, sharing the history that all the old folks know. So
Thanks, Mike. And then yes, and Lucien, which bill are we urging the governor to veto? The coastal zone loophole one. Which bill did we hear the gov was going to veto? So yes, HB 732 is the increases the from $500,000 to $750,000 the trigger for a special management area major permit. So HB 732 we want the gov to veto. We also want him to veto HB 796, which he said he was going to do, but until he does it, it's up in the air. And then I see Sherry has her hand up. Sherry, would you like to share a few words with the audience? Wait, did she just come up like that? All right. Okay. All right. I see your hands down. Let's see.
the military leases, Reza?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes, there was a resolution. Where is it or can you please provide an update on House Resolution 199 urging DLNR to conduct a comprehensive economic analysis of all military leases? Yeah, so this resolution did get a hearing in the House. Basically wanted to look at all of the opportunity costs that have been incurred and that could be incurred if the Army is, the military is allowed to, or from the Army's use of state lands under the leases that are expiring in the next few years, and then looking forward, right, and what are opportunity costs that we may be incurring compared to other alternative uses, for example. And so there's a interesting testimony and discussion on this resolution. I passed out of its first committee and did not get a hearing in its second committee. But I think especially as we see, the current issues with the Puakaloa land retention proposal and the Army's just released the FEIS for Oahu lease lands. I think those those conversations are very topical and needed, as we figure out what's the best direction that we want the state to take. And how do we, how do we deal with all of the, the burdens and, some of the less helpful things, and the harms that have been inflicted on these lands. Okay, I think get open questions. Unless Marty or Makaʻala or anyone, if you have any parting thoughts for the audience.
I just want to put a plug in for the Lindsay's program. At the end of the day, the thing that matters most when it comes to working with lawmakers is relationships. And so if you want to try to influence decision making, and as Auntie Makaʻala said, like, with the way the federal government is going, we need to double down on our state and county lawmakers to make sure that, our basic rights are protected. And so developing relationships with them is the key next step. So please sign up and help out. And I'll probably be there, so we'll get to make friends. So.
And I just want to identify a bill. I'm not even actually remembering the number, whether it was HB or SB at this point, 1511, that was targeted to the waters right behind my face. Hanalei Bay, as you know, is gorgeous, right? Unique in the world. But that makes us the preferred destination for people with too much money to spend. And we had yachts 240 feet long with submarines and helicopters on them. I kid you not.
More money than sense is what it sounds like.
In Hanalei, not only did they not fit, but they were offensive, right? And you can only imagine the bad behavior once they did anything on land, right? So protecting our bay, we got it down to 75 feet. We did that because that's Hokulea, and Namahoe, 75 feet. So, but it's going to have these things that you think are very local, very, very only Hanalei is going to care. This is going to be, in my opinion, impactful for the whole island, because badly behaved people are badly behaved people in the water and the land. And they probably thought there was nothing wrong with coming to this small place, like we were some other country, and taking up that kind of space. So we're very, very happy. It got really good support, and Senator Gochi really championed it. It was interesting. We've only been asking for it for 10 years. So the last thing I want to say is don't give up.
Yeah, there's some amazing things that can come about from just folks like looking to their own place and seeing how they can make it better, and that becomes a model for other places. And definitely some very important.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to change or for new culture and new habits to be formed, just because we have a lot of new electeds in the House. And there's like been a shift in some of the power around here. Like Hawaii is particularly powerful now, given both Speaker and Senate President. So anyway, I feel like that there's a time to get involved, and this is one of them. It's going to make a big difference, and the more people we can have engaged, the better.
All right. Okay. Well, it's 7:30, so thank you, folks, for staying a little past the time we're planning to end. Please reach out if you have any questions. Spread the word about the wins that we got, and also the needs that we have for more civic engagement. And yeah, and thank you so much for all that you've done and do on behalf of our audience. All right. Thank you.